welcome back to another Expressive Vision course of orthodontics. This is Dr. Sangeeta, where we help you understand and learn dentistry better and easy way in Dental Pathshala, and also you can find more interesting videos like this in the playlist. Now you don't have to take down notes, they will be provided in the description below. There is a link that will take you to the notes, and if you are searching for more interesting notes, you can find it at www.xtooth.com. So without wasting any time, let's get started with the today's topic, today's part of the orthodontic course, which is the orthodontics diagnosis. And before we get started, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon so that you don't miss any of our future notifications. So guys, talking about starting with the orthodontic diagnosis today. So first of all, before starting any treatment, the very first thing we do is take a case history, and then we diagnose, and accordingly we plan the treatment, right? We don't see that this is a crowding case and then we start off the treatment, right? We have got certain procedures which are to be carried out in a certain way. So for that, we have got a systematic approach to do that. So these diagnostic aids, which are very important for all the cases, are what do we call the essential diagnostic aids. And the other diagnostic aids, which are not essential for all the cases, but they may require some specialized instrument and they may be important for certain cases. So these are the supplemental. As the name suggests. So as the name suggests, essential means they are going to be very important. So without these essential diagnostic aids, it is close to impossible to do all the treatment which a patient requires. So these are the clinical aids which are important for all the cases. They are very simple. They don't require any expensive equipments. So the following are the essential diagnostic aids. That is the start. We always start with a case history. So the very first thing we do is when the patient approaches to us, we take a case history, right? In that we will be studying about examinations. Then study models. We take an impression, we pour the cast, and then we make a model. So in the model we can do the model analysis, we can do the examinations, right? So then we have also the important thing is that some radiographs. So radiographs, which all radiographs are important, which all radiographs are essential, which all are supplemental, that we need to understand. So the most common radiographs which we do is IOPR, right, which is our periapical radiographs, intraoral periapical radiographs. Also we see bite wings and OPG, which is also an oral panoramic radiograph. So that is also one more important thing. The essential diagnostic aid for ortho is that we take a photograph. So facial photograph also we take, so that we understand the profile of the patient and we analyze the profile, right? So facial photographs. These are the essential diagnostic aids, which includes case history, clinical examination, study models, some radiographs, that is the IOPR, OPG, bite wing, and the facial photographs. Now talking about the supplemental diagnostic aids, see, as the name suggests, they are not essential, they are supplemental. So these are not essential for all the cases, and also they may require some specialized instrument, right? And not all the dentists can also possess all these essential supplemental diagnostic aids. That is the reason we are calling them supplemental. So these include some specialized radiographs. These specialized radiographs can be the CEPHs, which is our cephalometric radiographs, occlusal radiographs. Then we have lateral jaw views. Then we have cone shift technique. So these are the specialized radiograph. Also, there may be requirement for electromyography for the examination of the muscle activity. As you can see, M is there, so muscle activity we examine. There may be requirement of hand wrist radiograph in certain patients in order to assess the bone age or in order to assess the maturation age. Then we may require some endocrine test for the patient. Also examination or estimation of the BMR, which is the basal metabolic rate, diagnostic setups, and occlusograms. We will be talking all this one by one. Right. So guys, starting with the clinical examination. We do it while recording the case history. So we will be covering the most important points for exam viewpoint. So for the competitive exam viewpoint. Otherwise, orthodontic diagnosis is covered already in the orthodontic lecture series. You can find it that in the playlist if you are looking for a more depth or more thorough knowledge. In this video, we are going to talk only about the high yielding points which are required for a competitive exam. So starting with the shape of the head is classified into meso. So this side we are going to write the shape of the head, other side we are going to write the facial profile. So meso words, when you see, that means medium. You can remember it from the medium. M for medium, M for average, we can say, right? Mesocephalic. Cephalic is a word which means the head term, which means head. Then here we have meso, this side we are going to write prosopic. So mesocephalic means the shape of the head is average. So the dental arches are going to be a normal dental arch. Mesoprosopic means there is an average or there is a normal facial form of a person. So what is a facial form? Basically facial form, why do we have to classify it? Because see, the facial form is important because there is a simple way to describe it. It can be either round, it can be oval, it can be squarish kind of face. Let me just make a diagram here. So cephalic means head and prosopic means face. So a mesoprosopic is going to be like this. This person is our mesoprosopic. Then guys, we have the word dolicho. Dolichocephalic means long and narrow head. So the head, this is the average head. Then here we have long and narrow head. So the person head, okay, let's just write head also here. This is the meso again. Then the other one we have is the long and narrow face and long and narrow head. So long and narrow head is dolichocephalic. Long and narrow face is leptoprosopic. So here we have leptoprosopic. That means the person is having a long and narrow face. When a person is having a long and narrow head, a long and narrow face, then the patient can have a narrow dental arch. That means patient can have constricted maxilla. So there can be also crossbite because of the constricted maxilla, right? The third one, this is long and narrow. Long and narrow. Other side we have is the average, wherein we have studied meso word. Third term we have is the brachycephalic, which means short and broad. B for broad, B for brachy, you can remember. And here we have Uri, E-U-R-Y, Uri prosopic. So let's make broad and short. Broad and short face, broad and short head. So broad and short is, head is brachycephalic, and broad and short face is Uri. Uri prosopic. So this is broad and short. B for B for broad, B for brachy, you can remember, right? Because the person is having a short head, broad and short head, broad and short face, so the patient can have broad dental arches. This is the reason that we are studying the shape of the head, the shape of the face, right? So this is the classification of the head of the shape of the head and the facial form. So talking about face more, we have got facial index. See, there are two terms. One is the facial index and one is the cephalic index. So this facial index, let's write in this same order. Here let's write the cephalic index, and the other side let's write the facial index. Now the cephalic index is width divided by width of the head divided by length of the head into 100. But facial index is opposite. Length of the face divided by width of the face into 100. So this is exactly opposite to the facial index, is opposite to the cephalic index. Cephalic index, we have W in the numerator and length in the denominator. So cephalic index is the maximum width of the head divided by the maximum length of the head into 100, and the average value for cephalic index is 76 to 81%. But on the other hand, facial index is length of the face divided by the width. Width is going to be taken from the zygoma to the zygoma. So that is the bizygomatic width we are talking about here. So facial index is length of the face divided by the bizygomatic width into 100. So the average value for the facial index is 84 to 87.9%. So both these facial and cephalic index was given by a person, I mean two person there, Martin and Saller. So this is about the cephalic index and the facial index. So guys, let's talk about the face. Here we have a person. Now once we look at the face, there are three parts. Face can be divided into three parts. The first one is the upper part of the face. So this can be the upper part of the face. Then we have the middle part of the face, and we have the lower part of the face. If you can see here, the upper 1/3 of the face, the middle 1/3 of the face and lower 1/3 of the face, they are almost equal. So the ratio between the middle third of the face and the lower 1/3 of the face is almost 1:1. It is actually 45:55, but we can say in a balanced face the ratio is almost equal, so 1:1. And also we can divide the lower face into two parts. One is the upper face So the lower face can be divided into upper and lower facial height. So there is a line which connects the lips. So line up to the upper lip is our upper, and the line from the lower lip is our lower. So here this is the upper and this is the lower. If you see upper facial height and the lower facial height, lower is slightly okay guys, we have lost it now, I guess. Okay, it's here. If you have a look at the lower facial height, this is the lower facial height. So it is larger than the upper facial height. So the ratio between the upper and the lower facial height is 1:2. That means the lower facial height is double the upper facial height. So guys, upper to lower facial height is 1:2. It's not 1:1, it's 1:2. Now let's talk about the facial profiles. Facial profiles is the side view. So talking about the first profile here we have is almost a straight line. So as you can see here, it is almost a straight line. So this profile is a straight line. Then we have a convex profile. That means the two lines forms an angle with the concavity facing the tissues. Here we have is the, as you can see here, this is a like this is a convex profile. A convex profile. So it is, this profile can be a result of the prognathic maxilla or it can be a result of retrognathic mandible. So this profile is usually seen in class 2 division 1. Then the other profile we have is the concave profile. Like this, a concave profile. Now the two reference lines form an angle with the convexity towards the tissues. So this type of profile is associated with the prognathic mandible, or the maxilla can be retrognathic. So this is usually seen in class 3 malocclusion cases. The another one we have is the facial divergence. So what is a facial divergence? First of all, a facial divergence is an anterior or a posterior inclination of the lower face. So the lower face can either be anteriorly inclined or the posteriorly inclined if we compare it with the forehead. So we are going to draw the lines for the facial divergence. So here we have a straight, as you can see here we have got a straight or orthogonathic facial divergence. So this is a straight or orthogonathic. So the line between the forehead and the chin is straight, or it is perpendicular to the floor, we can say. The another one here we have is the, So guys, another profile we have here is the, as you can see here, like this. So it is a posterior divergent. It is diverging posteriorly, right? So posterior divergent. This is a line which is drawn between the forehead and the chin, and it slants posteriorly towards the chin. As you can see, it is slanting posteriorly at the chin area, right? So that is the reason we are saying it the posterior divergent. Then we have got another one, if we call it, as you can see here, this line is anterior divergent. As guys you can see here, this line, a line which is drawn between the forehead and the chin, it is inclining anteriorly towards the chin. So that is the reason why we tell it the anterior divergent. Anterior divergent. So this is the facial divergence. Now there is a line which is drawn from the forehead to chin. It can be anterior inclined, there can be a posterior inclined. So now talking about the examination of the lips. Normally the upper lip cover the entire labial surface of the upper anterior teeth, and lower lip covers the entire labial surface of the lower anterior teeth. And if we see this lip, suppose this is a lip, we see that there are 2 to 3 millimeters of anterior teeth visibility. So guys, this is our upper lip, this fellow is the lower lip, and if we see the incisor visibility, it is usually 2 to 3 millimeters. Now like that we have got 3 types of lips. The lip can be competent lips. So the lips, when the mouth is at rest or when the muscles are at relaxed position, lips are in slightly contact with each other. As you can see here, there is no space between the lips when the lips are at rest. So these are the competent lips. Then guys, we have incompetent lips. So this is a incompetent lips. This is the incompetent lips. So they are morphologically short lips which do not provide lip seal. When the person is at relaxed state, there is no lip seal. So lip seal can be only achieved via the active contraction of the muscles. So when there is an active contraction of the mentalis muscle or the perioral muscles, the muscles which are surrounding the mouth, which is the orbicularis oris. So when the active contraction happens, then there is only a lip seal. Otherwise at relaxed state there is no lip seal. So this is the person's face at rest. Then we have the potentially competent lips, the other potentially incompetent lips. So the lips are normal in size, but they fail to provide a lip seal because of the proclined incisor teeth. So because the incisors are proclined, so that is the reason that they cannot provide a lip seal, and this kind of lips we call it potentially incompetent lips. Then we have, guys, the examination of the chin. So in the examination of the chin, we see the mentolabial sulcus. Mentolabial sulcus. If you see a class 2 profile, so in case of a class 2 profile, this is the upper lip. This is how a class 2 profile looks like, right? So in the class 2 profile, you will find that there is a deep mentolabial sulcus. So there is a deep mentolabial sulcus which is present in a case of class 2 division 1. Class 2 division 1 profile, it is deep, but it is shallow for bimaxillary protrusion. Then in the examination of chin, we also see the activity of mentalis muscle. So the mentalis activity normally, what happens in a normal individual, the mentalis muscle doesn't show any contraction when it is at rest, right? But in case of hyperactive mentalis activity, which we have talked about in the malocclusion lecture series. So in the malocclusion, we have studied that in class 2 division 1 cases, there is going to be a hyperactive mentalis activity, right? Class 2 division 1 cases, there is a hyperactive mentalis activity. My dear students, this we have already covered in the malocclusion lecture series. So mentalis activity in class 2 division 1, it is the hyperactive mentalis activity, and this is the reason that it causes the puckering of the chin. Then the chin position and the prominence, there usually there is a prominent chin which is associated with a class 3 malocclusion. While recessive chin, because there is a retrognathic mandible which we see in a class 2 case. See, class 2 is either there is a class 2 case, there is going to be either a retroclined mandible or there is going to be a proclined maxilla, right? So in case of class 2 case, we usually see that there is a retroclined chin or a recessive chin, but in case of class 3 malocclusion, because class 3 is, there is a prominent or a proclined mandible. So this is the reason class 3 usually we see that there is a prominent chin which is associated with a class 3 malocclusion, as you can see here. In case of class 3 malocclusion, have a look at here, we see that there is a prominent chin. But in case of class 2, we see there is a small chin, or we can say a recessive chin. Now talking about next part, which is a nasolabial angle. This is an angle which is formed by the lower border of the nose. So we have to make a nose here. Lower border of the nose and a line connecting the intersection of the nose and the upper lip. So here we have the upper lip. So this angle is formed by, my lovely students, by the intersection of the lower border of the nose, basically a line connecting the intersection of the nose and the upper lip with the tip of the lip. So this angle is what do we call the nasolabial angle. Nasolabial angle. So guys, this angle is normally 110 degrees and it reduces in the patient with a proclined upper anterior teeth. So if you see here, let's make this angle and compare this angle. So guys, as you can see here, it is reduced in case of a patient with a proclined upper anterior teeth, or we can say a prognathic maxilla, and it increases in a person with a retroclined maxilla or retrognathic maxilla, we can say, right. So ranges from 90 to 110 degree. If they are asking the range, which is 90 to 110 degrees, this is usually more in the females as compared to the males. So it is, this angle is reduced in case of a proclined maxilla, and it is increased in case of a retroclined maxilla. So this is about the nasolabial angle, which is 100 to 90 to 100 degrees. So guys, then we have to see, not let's talk about, we have to see in the patient what is the path of closure. So we have to observe the path of closure. Path of closure, my lovely students, is the movement of mandible. So when the mandible is moving from the rest to the habitual occlusion position. So usually occlusion position is wherein there is a maximum intercuspation. When the cusp to fossa relationship is there, that is the point where the person is at occlusion, right. So from the rest, when the patient is going to a habitual occlusion, we evaluate this path, is what we call it, the path of closure for that person. So there can be abnormalities which can be present or which can be seen in the path of closure. So there can be a forward path of closure. What do we mean by forward path of closure? That means the person, suppose, let's see a diagram first. Suppose okay, this is very big lips, hypertrophied lips. Let's make the normal lips. Suppose this is where a person was occluding, right. This was the proper occlusion. Now in the habitual occlusion, when the person is taking the mandible forward, so that is a forward path of closure. That means while closing the mouth, an individual or the patient is taking the mandible is guided in a more forward position. And why it is happening so? Because it is the habitual position is such a way that the person is having an edge to edge incisor contact. So that means the forward positioning of the mandible is guided in order to allow the mandibular incisor teeth to go labial to the upper anterior teeth, right. So these are the, suppose these were the upper anterior teeth. Let's make it from the black first. It was supposed to be like this, right, when there is a occlusion in the teeth. Now what is happening here in a forward path of closure? The person is taking the mandible forward and closing it more forwardly like this. So he is taking the mandibular teeth more forward so that the mandibular incisor to go labial to the upper incisors teeth. So this path of closure occur in a patient with a mild skeletal promalsy, or in case of edge to edge incisor bite. If we see edge to edge incisor contact, in case of these patient, the patient is taking the mandible forward in a forward position to allow the incisors to go labial to the upper incisors. Next one, my lovely students, is the backward path of closure. See, as everything is there in the name itself, I always tell you to analyze the name and then start reading the topic. The backward path of closure means While closing the mouth, so suppose this is a normal closure, maximum intercuspation, normal occlusion, right? Now what happens in the backward path of closure, a person is guiding the mandible posteriorly or backwardly, as the name suggests, backward. That means he is taking the mandible backward now here. So this is the backward path of closure. So backward path of closure is what do we see in case of class 2 division 2. Now if you remember class 2 division 2, what do I tell you for class 2 division 2? That the maxillary central incisors are retroclined and the lateral incisors are proclined. So because this maxillary central incisors are retroclined, so a person is guiding the mandible more posteriorly, because the class 2 division 2 cases, they exhibit the premature incisor contact. So that is the reason a person is taking the mandible backward, because already the maxillary incisor retroclined. So the mandible is also, the person is taking backward in order to have a normal contact. So that is a habitual backward path of closure, is what do we see in class 2 division 2 cases. Also there is something known as the lateral path of closure. Now that you understand both of these terms, you can appreciate or analyze that what can be there in the lateral path of closure. So there is a lateral, while the patient is taking the mandible from the rest to the habitual occlusion, there is a lateral deviation of mandible either to the left side or to the right side, because there is occlusal prematurities which is present, or there is a narrow maxillary arch which is present. Because of that, the person is deviating the mandible in a habitual occlusal position. It can be the left or it can be the right. So that is a lateral path of closure. Then my lovely students, we check the respiration. So we check the breathing and the swallowing. So breathing pattern we have, it can be a nasal, oral or oronasal pattern of breathing. So there are some simple tests we can check the mode of the respiration. What is the type of respiration a person is having? So how do we check it? First of all, there is a mirror test. So mirror test, usually we have a mouth mirror which has mirror at the one side, right? So like that we have got a mirror. But in case of mouth breathing test, the mirror which we take is a double-sided mirror. So there is going to be the mirror on the both the sides. So both of the sides there is going to be a mirror. When do we check this mirror test for the mouth breathing or the nasal breathing? A double-sided mirror is placed between the nose. So a double-sided mirror is placed between the nose and the mouth. So this is the double-sided mirror, right? Both the side there is a mirror. So what happens when the person is breathing? So there is a fogging which is present at the nasal side, right? Fogging is present normally at the nasal side, because when the patient breathes, so that is going to fog the nasal side of the double-sided mirror. But in case of person with a mouth breathing habit, what will happen? Oral breathing habit. The fogging will present also at the oral side. So that will tell us that what kind of breathing a person is having, either it is a nasal breathing or a oral breathing. Also my lovely student, we can observe it. So in case of the nasal breather, the external nares, they will dilate. So the external nares, they are going to dilate during the inspiration. In case of mouth breathers, there is either change in the external nares or they may constriction present during the inspiration. The another test we have is the water test. So what do we do in water test? We ask the patient to fill the mouth with the water and retain, that means to keep the water inside the mouth for some time. While in case of nasal breathers, they can easily put water in the mouth because they are breathing from the nose. But the people who are breathing from the mouth or the mouth breathers, they will find it difficult to put the water inside the mouth and then breathe, because they breathe from the mouth, right? So they cannot take the water inside. The third test is the cotton test. So what do we do in cotton test? So we put a butterfly shape cotton. So we put some cotton here, butterfly shape cotton. We place it over the upper lip, below the nose, so below the nostrils, and if the cotton flutters down, so if the cotton flutters down, that means the person is having a nasal breather. But this test can be used to determine in case of a person is having nasal blockage at one side. So unilateral nasal blockage we can see, because the other side, wherever there is a blockage, there will not be fluttering of the cotton piece. So this is the test to evaluate the breathing habit. Then we have got swallowing habit. How do we check the swallowing habit? We evaluate this. First of all, in newborn, what happens? The tongue is relatively large and it protrudes between the gum pad, because that is the reason how it is going to establish a lip seal. So if there is a persistence of infantile swallowing habit, so it is indicated by the presence of the protrusion of the tip of the tongue, contraction of the perioral muscles during the swallowing, and no contact at the molar region during swallowing. So these are the tests that we see that the person is having a retained infantile swallowing pattern. Now guys, talking about the models, we have the gnathostatic models. So these are basically the orthodontic models, where the base of the cast is trimmed corresponds to the Frankfurt horizontal plane. So the base, this is the cast, and base of the cast is to the FH plane. So FH plane is going to be our PO, porion orbitail, that we will talk about in the cephalometry. Then the diagnostic setup, which was given by Caslings. So HD Caslings. It is useful in visualizing or testing the effect of the complex tooth movement and extraction on the occlusion. Then we have electromyography. So it records the electrical activity of the muscles. As I told you, M for EMG or our electromyography, it is M for muscle. So it is going to record the electrical activity of the muscle, the resting potential of the muscle fiber. So usually the resting potential of the muscle fiber is 85 to 90 millivolt, and this action potential is picked up by the electrodes. So we have surface electrode, needle electrode. Surface electrodes are used when the muscle is superficially placed below the skin, or the needle electrode when it is deep inside, because surface, when the electrodes are placed on the surface, so that means it is going to tell the superficial, and for deep we place the needle electrodes. For example, if we are checking the muscle activity of the pterygoid, so pterygoid muscle and all, we can use the needle electrodes. Then we have digigraphs. As the name suggests, digi means digital. So digigraph, that means a digital graphic image. So a video imaging or a computerized imaging or a sonographic digitalized image, we can say. So this system tells us the cephalometric evaluation and also the treatment progression, as there is no requirement of radiation exposure. Suppose some patient we cannot put more of radiation exposure, so in that case we use the digigraphy. So the patient models, radiograph, photograph, cephalometric tracing, all can be stored in one small disk, and therefore it reduces the storage also. So we have everything in one storage form. Furthermore, it is also a valuable tool for a graph for improving the communication to the patient also. So we can tell everything with the help of this computer technology to the patient. We can educate also the patient with this. Then guys, we have occlusograms. So occlusograms are the tracing of a photograph, or we can say it is a photocopy of a dental arch. So occlusograms are used for occlusal evaluation, occlusal relationship, or we can also estimate the arch length, arch width, and also spacing is present or crowding is present. So basically also we can estimate the tooth movement in all the three planes in the three-dimensional space. Also we can see the anchorage requirement. Then we have the laser holography. Holography, my lovely students, it is a photographic technique for recording or reconstructing the images in a three-dimensional way. So we are recording the image, and this recorded image is what do we call a holograph or hologram, and this hologram is recorded. Hologram is an image, right, three-dimensional image, and this image is recorded with the help of laser technology. So laser light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, right. So laser is recording a image is what do we call the laser holography. Like that we have got cineradiography, radiography, which is basically a moving radiograph. Cinema means a video, right, a picture, so which is a motion, a picture in a motion. So like that a radiograph which is in a form of a picture, motion picture, so that is our basically a cineradiography. So what happens, the subject is oriented properly and X-ray motion picture is obtained using a cine camera which runs 240 frames per second. So this diagnostic aid is used to visualize also the swallowing pattern of the patient. So there is a movie like projection, right. So it is like a movie like, it is like a movie is formed of entire of our radiograph. So that is basically a radiographic motion picture. So guys, this is about our diagnostic aids. If you want to study more about diagnostic aids, then I have made a separate video. You will find it in the orthodontic lecture series, and if you are looking for notes, then you will find a link provided in the description box below. Now guys, last topic of today lecture series is the theories of child psychology. So theories of child psychology, actually it is supposed to be covered in the pedo lecture series, but let's just have a look at the theories of child psychology. So we have two kind of theories. One is the psychodynamic theory. Other one we have is the behavioral theory or behavior learning theory. So guys, we have the behavioral learning theory. Psychodynamic theory, we have the psychosocial theory, psychosexual theory. First we will talk about the sex. So psychosexual theory, then we will talk about the society. So psychosexual theory, which was given by, or psychoanalytic theory, the other name is psychoanalytic, which was given by Sigmund Freud. Now here in this theory we have the topographic model which says that tip of the iceberg. So there is, iceberg is a big huge of snow which is present, right, a kind of a snow stone, and we see in the ocean that it looks like a small piece of ice, but is actually it's a big ice. So 90% of our mind is the subconscious, unconscious mind, not subconscious, unconscious mind, and 10% is only the conscious mind. And the another one it says is the psyche triad. So psychic model which says that a person has got three identity. One is the id, ego and superego. So this is the ego, which is the reality. Then there is something which is known as the id. So id is basically the bad person, bad individuality which works on the pleasure principles. Then we have got superego, which is the good guy. So which based on the morality principles, values, right, what is wrong, what is right. So it tells us. So this is the psychic model or the psychic triad. So in the psychosexual theory, we also study the stages of development. So we have got oral stage. So in the oral stage, when a child is developing, these are the stages of the development. So first a child puts thumb inside the mouth. So that means he satisfy his desires via the oral desires. So this is usually present between 1 to 2 years. Then there is a anal stage, that is the potty training stage, right? 2 to 3 years of time of age. Then is the phallic stage. So phallic stage is the stage where we study two complexes. Oedipus who was the king, so that is attraction of boy towards his mother, and the Electra, which is attraction of girl toward his father, her father. So this is the, and also there is a penis envy. So these come under the phallic stage, which lasts for 3 to 5 years of age. Then there is a latency stage, boy to mother, let's write boy to mother, and then girl to father. Then there is a latency stage, which is our mixed dentition stage. So there is a maturation of ego, or we can say there is a personality development which occurs between the 6 to 12 years of life. Then there is a genital stage, where there is a reproductive organ forms or develops. So that is the genital stage. So these all are the psychosexual theory. This is all the psychosexual theory. Second one we have in the psychodynamic theory is social. Now we'll talk about social. So psychosocial theory was given by Erik Erikson. So in this theory, there are, this theory will take a lot of time for me to explain it to you. Suppose this is the whole stage of a life, whole stage of a person's life. So this is the infant stage. Then there is a toddler stage. Then there is a preschool stage. Then there is a school stage. Then there is an adolescent stage. Then now a person is a young adult. And then the middle age comes, which is my age. Then there is a older age. So all these stages. In all these stages, there, if everything goes right, then there is a right thing. For example, if the child has satisfied his oral desires, then the infant will build a trust. Or if the oral desires are not fulfilled, then there is a mistrust which is developed during the 0 to 2 years, which is at the infancy stage. Same goes for toddler. So in the toddler, either there is going to be shame when in the potty training stage, when the child is not able to go to potty, and instead of that he is pooping in the pants, or he is peeing in the pants. So that builds a shame and the doubt. Or if he is able to do his potty training stage, then guys, there is an autonomy. So like that, there are stages. At the preschool stage, either there is a guilt which is developed, usually develops with the bullying and all, right? Or there can be a initiative. In the school age, there can be industry, or there can be inferiority which can be developed. So in adolescent, either there can be role confusion, or there can be building of the identity. Childs understand that which career he should pursue his life. So in the young adult stage, there can be isolation, or there can be intimacy. And in the middle age, there can be generativity, That means a person is still forming good content or doing good in life. There is a growth pattern, or there can be a stagnant stage in the life. That means he is doing the 9 to 5 job and he is just passing the life. Or in the older age, there can be either ego integrity or despair. Despair or ego integrity. So guys, this was the psychosocial theory by Erik Erikson. Next one we have in the psychodynamic theory, the third one in the psychodynamic theory is our cognitive theory, which is given by Jean Piaget. So in that he has talked about assimilation and accommodation. For example, if a child is at learning stages and any new information which is provided by you to a child is the assimilation. So assimilation is the new information. For example, I have given you an example in one of my lecture series that suppose if a child sees a cow and if you tell the child that see, there are 4 legs, then there are 2 horns, then there is 1 tail, then this is animal which is cow, and what happens when he see a bull, then this new information of cow is the assimilation, right? And then he sees a bull and he tells you that see, there is a cow going, then you correct it by saying no, this is not cow, this is a bull. So you tell the difference between the cow and the bull. So there is a change in the information, which is what do we call accommodation. So this is the change in the information. So there are new concepts or new strategies which a child develop, we call it the schema, right? So there is a equilibrium which is present, equilibration which is present between the assimilation, which is the new information, and the accommodation, which is the change in the information. And Jean Piaget, he gave sequence of development, 4 stages of the sequence of development. So there is a sensory motor stage. See, everything is there in the name itself, I always tell you. So sensory motor stage. Sensory means the visual, the senses. Motor means the muscle activity. So when a person sees a mother, he smiles, or when he hear the sound of a toy, he smiles, he laughs. So all these things are symbolic play, and it is seen at the age of 0 to 2 years. So there is a sensory motor. So senses, he is responding to the senses. So either it is seeing, hearing, touching, taste, smell, all these sensation, the child is responding. The second one, so sensory motor stage is 0 to 2 years. Then we have pre-operational stage. The pre-operational stage, my lovely students, is from 2 to 5 years. So pre-operation, that means thinking process is started, but the child is still illogical about it. For example, if you ask a child, see, if you show a child an experiment, if you take a large container, a jug full of water, and the same amount of water, if you put it in a small vessel, and if you ask that which container the water is more, then they will point out at the bigger container, but the water quantity is still the same. So the thinking process has started, but they are illogical about it. So this is the water vessel experiment, and which tells us that the child is at the pre-operational stage. So there is animism, there is a constructism, egocentric, all these concepts are at pre-operational stage, which is 2 to 5 years. Then there is a concrete operational stage. Now a child has got a logical thinking, as the name suggests, concrete. So a child thinking is logical. Now he will be able to tell you that the water quantity is same in both the vessels. So this ranges in the mixed dentition period, which is 6 to 2 years. 6 to 2 years for the psychosexual theory, that is the Sigmund Freud theory. We have studied the latency stage during this period, right? So fourth one in the cognitive theory by Jean Piaget is the formal operational stage. So this is the time that a child learns etiquettes, that the child develop the reasoning capacity also. So he'll be questioning each and everything, why the sun is hot and all these, everything surrounding them, he started reasoning it. So this is the formal operational stage which ranges from 11 to 15 years. So this finishes the psychodynamic theory. In the psychodynamic theory, we have studied the psychosexual theory, psychosocial theory and the cognitive theory. Psychosexual theory, which was given by Sigmund Freud, in that we have studied the stages. Then the psychosocial theory by Erik Erikson and the cognitive theory by Jean Piaget. Now talking about the behavior learning theory. So in the behavior learning theory, we have got 4 theories. The first one in that we have got the hierarchy of needs. So hierarchy of needs was given by Maslow, Abraham Maslow in 1954. So hierarchy of needs is the self-actualization theory. That means when the need develops, the child start actualizing the thing. Then the second one is the social learning theory by Bandura. Theory by Bandura, Albert Bandura. So this theory is based on the observation by learning. So how attitude of mother is towards a child. So what happens, social learning theory, as the name suggests, there is a learning pattern which is developed from the society. So it can be best stated by the child who observe with the older sibling. So when he sees that the older sibling is undergoing treatment and the behavior of the older one, the youngest one copies the same behavior. So this is how, what do we call, the child learns from the society. Third one we have is the classical conditioning theory. Classical conditioning theory is the classical example. If you remember dog and bell experiment. So classical conditioning theory, which was given by Ivan Pavlov. So there is a dog and a bell experiment. So dog responds to the bell. Initially the dog doesn't respond to the bell, but after few days, when he knows that when the bell rings, the food comes. So the dog responds to the conditioned bell stimulus with the conditioned salivatory response. The fourth theory in the behavior learning theory we have is the operant conditioning theory, which is given by Skinner BF. So this theory we have 4 things. One is we apply, another one is we remove. If we apply pleasant stimulus, that is giving the child toys, we cannot give candies and all because they are cariogenic. So that is our positive reinforcement. If we apply unpleasant stimulus, then there is a positive punishment. If we remove the pleasant stimulus, then this is negative punishment. If we remove the unpleasant, that is negative reinforcement. So this is the operant conditioning theory given by Skinner. So this finishes the theories of the child psychology. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the lecture. If you have enjoyed the lecture, then give it a thumbs up because it motivates me to put more lectures of this kind. So guys, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and also comment in the comment section that if this video is helpful or not, and more videos of this kind if you want on particular topic, please do leave a comment in the comment section. Also, you can support us on Paytm as well as on PayPal, and you don't have to take down notes. They will be provided in a link in the description box below. I hope that this video has benefited you. All the best for your competitive exam. And guys, take care. Keep learning, keep studying and stay motivated. I'll see you soon in the next video.